Hello guys, and welcome to this screencast where I'm gonna sum up some of the concepts that you've been through during the biology modules in last week. So let's get started on that. And I really want to thank you for all the very nice pictures from the photo safari that I've received from you. I kind of feel like I've traveled the world with you, and it's been a very nice journey. So I'm gonna sum up the concepts by showing you some of the pictures taken by yourself and your classmates. So an organism is of course an individual, and these are three nice examples of organisms. But an organism can also just be a one-celled animal. For instance, a little paramecium that we talked about when we had cell biology. It could also be a bacteria or even perhaps a virus. So organisms, just one individual. And then we have populations. So a population will be a number of organisms belonging to the same species. And these are some of your examples, right? So a pigeon population here, and woodlice population, and this is Bellis pyralis, in Latin, this flower, a population of this, and a population of geese over here, right? So a population is a number of individuals belonging to the same species living in the same area, actually, even, yeah. A community is then all the species living and interacting in the same area. So we can see that in this picture there's maybe 10 different species, right? Yellow flower and white flower and different types of grass and probably also some other herbs down here, right? And all these plants will be part of this plant community. They will compete for resources such as light and water and inorganic nutrients in the soil. So they will interact with each other. Sometimes there would also be insects, right? So insects would also be part of the community. And if we zoom out a little bit, then there might be other organisms nearby, other populations nearby that would also interact with the plant community out here in the meadow. So all the populations living together in the same area, interacting with each other, that's the community. And then we have factors that can affect populations or communities, and we divide those into abiotic factors and biotic factors, if you have already heard, right? So examples of abiotic factors that you have sent in are, many of you have focused on sunlight, and that is of course a very important abiotic factor since it's needed for photosynthesis, and if we don't have photosynthesis, then we don't have any organic molecules for the consumers to eat. Then over here we have a picture of rocks and soil. So abiotic factors can also be nutrients in the soil, water in the soil, stuff like that. And up here we have a picture of a road running through a forest, right? So the road will of course be an important abiotic factor since animals would need to cross the road, for instance, or and maybe plants can spread their seeds to the other side of the road. So a barrier of some sort or space would also be considered an abiotic factor. Then examples of biotic factors. Many of you have sent in pictures of just living things, right? Stating that any living thing is a biotic factor. And that's not really sort of focused enough, because it's correct that biotic factors are sort of living things, but it's not just the presence of it, it's that it has an effect. So for instance, a good example of a biotic factor is that the trees provide nesting sites for birds. So the trees are an important biotic factor for the bird population in this area. Other biotic factors could be the fact that species compete, like I mentioned before. They compete for inorganic nutrients, they compete for sunlight, they compete for mates, for instance, if it's animals. So all these things would also be biotic factors. Same would be predation, the fact that someone is eating you, or parasitism, that some are infected by something. So all of these things would be biotic factors. And then ecosystems, right? The definition of an ecosystem is the community and the abiotic factors, right? So basically all the things that we've talked about so far, the organisms, the populations, put together to form communities, and then the abiotic factors interacting with the living things. All of this would be ecosystems. And here we have some very nice examples of ecosystems, right? So this is a sealed, closed ecosystem. One of you have produced this. And this is, of course, sort of a very restricted ecosystem. But I guess it would still be considered an actual ecosystem, right? We have different species, and it would be very disturbed and very human controlled, this ecosystem, right? But it's still considered an ecosystem, and insects might fly in, and maybe birds would visit the site as well. And this is, of course, a more natural ecosystem, with the lake, right? And all the organisms in the lake interacting, and then the temperature, the pH, sunlight availability, all those things being the important abiotic factors in this system. And then a habitat. Some of you have taken pictures of places where an animal live, and that is maybe too restricted, right? So a habitat is more than just sort of the nesting side of the bird, because it would also be the area where it finds its food, and other places that it visits to maybe mate or do other things, right? So the habitat is sort of the whole area visited by this organism, right? And this dead piece of wood would be the habitat for lots of different insects, right? And maybe some fungi, and we can see some moss, that's a plant. So many different organisms living together in this more restricted habitat, smaller habitat, right? Because they don't move so far away. So habitats can be very small, or they can be very large, depending on what species it is that occupy them. And then just to sum up, because some of the important concepts that you should know have to do with modes of nutrition, ways that organisms get the organic matter that they need, right? So the two primary mode of nutrition is that some organisms are autotroph and some organisms are heterotroph, right? So autotroph if you produce your own organic molecules, and heterotroph if you obtain your organic molecules from other organisms. And autotroph organisms can be divided into those that are photoautotroph. They get the energy that they need to put together the inorganic molecules and form organic compounds. They get the energy for that from sunlight. Some organisms are also chemoautotrophs. These would be bacteria mainly. And they get the energy for putting together the inorganic molecules to form organic molecules. They get the energy for that by oxidizing chemicals. You don't need to know much more about this than just that they exist. So we will focus much more on the photosynthetic organisms later on. And then the heterotroph organisms, they are divided into the consumers, the one that ingest living or recently killed organic matter, the detritivores that ingest non-living organic matter, and the saprotrophs that they do not ingest, but they feed on non-living organic matter by secreting digestive enzymes. So secreting means that they don't really have a mouth. They secrete the enzymes into the surroundings, and then they are able to absorb the products of that digestion into their cells. So examples of these would be earthworms and woodlice, ants, different things, and over here we find bacteria and fungi as being the saprotrophs. And you have sent in many nice pictures of this. So two good examples of producers conducting photosynthesis. So these are both photoautotrophs. This is seaweed, and this is of course a tulip. So yeah, producers both conducting photosynthesis. And three very nice examples of consumers, right? So this would be a herbivore, a primary consumer. This would be a secondary consumer. It would eat, and this would be a predator, right? So it would eat other animals. And humans are, of course, also examples of consumers. And we do both, right? We both eat plants and animals. And that is sometimes referred to as being omnivore, eating both of these things. And then you've sent in examples of detritivores, an earthworm, and somewhere here there's a fly eating the poop, and here we have an ant. And examples of saprotrophs. Very nice picture of a fungi, and this is mold on a bread. And I imagine that there's lots and lots of bacteria down in this compost container, right? So good examples of saprotrophs. And then just one additional concept, the concept of a species, right? So two organisms are considered belonging to the same species if they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, right? So these two frogs, they can mate and they can produce offspring, and this offspring will be able to meet another frog and produce offspring itself. Same with the toads. The two toads can mate, produce fertile offspring. But if a toad meets a frog, they might be able to mate and produce offspring, but that offspring would not be fertile and would not be able to mate and produce offspring. So the definition of a species, again, two organisms belong to the same species if they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. And the task after having watched this screencast is that I want you to correct and refine your explanations of the different concepts in the worksheet from last module. Yes, and that's it for now. I'll be back soon with another screencast. Bye for now.